When Morgan thinks back to high school, she doesn't remember James Greenlee. Riley can't exactly fault her for this. Her sister never worked on the yearbook, where James assisted on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the TA to Mr. Hastings, or Adam, as he preferred to be called. The point is, James remembers Morgan. It was 2003. James was graduating college that spring, but even so, it was Morgan who made him nervous. Morgan who made him feel younger and clumsier than a classroom of teenagers, flirting in braces, writing bad captions for amateur photography. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Morgan won't remember, James wore a collared shirt and a zip-front hoodie. He put hours of thought into this combination, this attempt at looking both relevant and mature. James asked his little sister to take him shopping at the mall, and in the dressing room of Macy's, he realized for the first time how tragic he looked. The way his cargo pants fell like tubes around his legs, how his faded Frank Zappa t-shirt was slightly warped from his mom's old dryer. James forced eye contact in the mirror, shaming himself, letting the image gore him as his sister waited, as she called his name, impatient, from the entrance. After that, James got contacts. This was before the rise of nerdy chic, before retro vintage frames flooded the market, before glasses could be considered sexy. All of that would come later, but in 2003, in small-town Oregon, James Greenlee was invisible to Morgan. On occasion, Morgan might remember passing through the yearbook room, looking for Riley after the last bell, stopping to glance at a photograph fastened to a lightbox, the tiny square pica showing through the back. Sometimes, the picture was of her, and as Morgan inspected it, James would remember that he'd borrowed the negative for that shot, that he needed to return it to the files before someone noticed it was missing. It wasn't that James was a pervert or a stalker. Morgan knows this as well as Riley. Morgan was 18 at the time, essentially a woman, and James was a man who, like many men to come, was taken by the strange combination of her beauty. He took the pictures so he could look, really look, at Morgan's skin, like honey in a glass jar, held up to the light. And Morgan's eyes, the color of granite, enormous and penetrating, difficult to look at for extended amounts of time. When James was done, he disposed of the photograph. He ripped it to pieces or held a match to the corner, let it smolder in the basin of his bathroom sink. At the time, he lived with an older professor and his Russian wife, who accused him of smoking heroin in their guest bathroom. Riley is the only one who knows this, the only person James has ever told. The admission didn't come at once. He cracked himself open, bit by bit, first that afternoon on an Indian beach, then later, as they stood looking out over Bangkok, a year after the accident, a lifetime after that day at Macy's. It returned them to their most vulnerable selves. It made Riley remember things, too. That entire year of high school, James never spoke to Morgan. Once, Morgan spoke to him. She asked if he knew where Riley was. 20 minutes before, James had sent Riley to photograph the girls' basketball practice in the main gym. They'd been joking about crouching low, shooting the freshmen like they were giants, and Riley had gone on her assignment with a quick, warm pulse that made all the pictures a little blurry. But then Morgan arrived. Morgan looked James in the eye and asked her question, and it made him so nervous that he must have forgotten. At the time, Riley imagined James was the kind of person who didn't recognize beauty, who perhaps didn't really care. When Morgan said she'd looked all over, that the TA didn't know where she was, Riley found no meaning until, 6 years later, she was made to revisit it. To understand the enormity of her sister's reach, how she'd always had this complicated, charismatic magic, this ability to make others arrange themselves around her oblivion, around her will.